Hi, I'm Charmaine.
And I'm Chierline, and we are your hosts for today.
We are joined by our guest for today, none other than Miss Shazny Ortiz from Psych4.
Hi, I'm Shaz.
Shazny, are you up for a challenge?
Yes, I'm up for a challenge.
That's great! We challenge you to run as fast as you can and let's test your limit.
1, 2, 3, go!
That's my limit. My breathing is heavy.
Well, that sounds about right. Your breathing is heavy because right now your body needs more oxygen to breathe.
Breathing is a part of our daily lives, which helps us in order for our body to survive. And our respiratory system is the one responsible to help us breathe. Breathing is formally called respiration. For complete exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in respiration, there are 4 steps in order to occur this simultaneously.
The first part of the process in respiration is called the pulmonary ventilation. It is the movement of air into the lungs which is called as inspiration, and it goes back to the movement of air out of the lungs which is then called expiration. The primary function of pulmonary ventilation is to make oxygen available to the blood, which is then transported by the cardiovascular system throughout the body to all the cells.
The second part is then called the external respiration. External respiration is the formal term for gas exchange. It describes both the bulk flow of air into and out of the lungs and the transfer of oxygen and carbon dioxide into the bloodstream through diffusion. It is the process of exchanging oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other blood solutes with the external environment. Respiration in whole is the process of delivering oxygen to the cells to extract the energy from sugars in oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria. This process uses oxygen and produces carbon dioxide as well as a number of other waste metabolites during the normal function of cells.
The third step is called the transportation of respiratory gases. It is where the transportation of oxygen from the lungs transport to the tissue and the transportation of carbon dioxide from the tissue to the lungs happens. And lastly, internal respiration. Internal respiration involves gas exchange between bloodstream and tissue, and cellular respiration. Gas exchange in tissues is result of tissue surface area, gas partial pressure gradients, and the blood perfusion of those tissues.
The respiratory system has 5 known functions. 1. Regulation of blood pH. The respiratory system can alter blood pH by changing blood CO2 levels. Second is the production of chemical mediators. The lungs produce an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme or ACE, which is an important component of blood pressure regulation. Number 3. Voice production. Air moving past the vocal folds makes sound and speech possible. Fourth is the olfaction. The sensation of smell occurs when airborne molecules are drawn into the nasal cavity. And fifth is the protection. The respiratory system provides protection against some microorganisms by preventing them from entering the body and removing them from respiratory surfaces.
There are 7 structures that make up the respiratory system. the external nose, the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs. The diaphragm and the muscles of the thoracic and abdominal walls are responsible for respiratory. But in this segment, I will be sharing you the 5 main parts.
Trachea. This is your main windpipe, which starts at the back of your throat. It helps to filter the air, then branches into your 2 bronchi.
Bronchi. You have 2 of these tubes, a left and a right one, which split off from the trachea to feed air into each lung.
Bronchioles. These tiny tubes branch off from the bronchi, extending throughout all of your lungs.
Alveoli. These are tiny air sacs that connects to each bronchiole, where an essential part of respiratory system function occurs. Blood passes through here, exchanging fresh oxygen from the air for carbon dioxide, which is collected from the body cells, carried by the red blood cells, then carried back to the lungs, which will then be exhaled.
The diaphragm. This is a dome-shaped muscle below your lungs and it is your primary breathing muscle. It flattens and pulls forward, which causes you to inhale air into your lungs. It expands during exhalation, which forces the air back out of your lungs.
How do the lungs work?
Every time you breathe in air, your diaphragm tightens, moving downward to make space in your chest. Your lungs expand, pulling air in through your nose and/or your mouth.
Oxygen passes from the alveoli to the hemoglobin in the surrounding capillaries, which carbon dioxide passes from the capillaries into the alveoli. The carbon dioxide is exhaled when your diaphragm relaxes and moves upward into the chest cavity, forcing the air out of your lungs. The oxygen-rich blood in your capillaries is carried to the pulmonary vein, where it travels to the left side of the heart and is then pumped throughout the rest of the body.
The respiratory system can be classified in 2 ways: structurally and functionally. Structurally, the respiratory system is divided into the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract includes the external nose, the nasal cavity, the pharynx with its associated structures, and the larynx. The lower respiratory tract includes the trachea, the bronchi and smaller bronchioles, and the lungs. Functionally, the respiratory system is divided into 2 regions, the conducting zone and the respiratory zone. The conducting zone is exclusively for air movement and extends from the nose to the bronchi. The respiratory zone is within the lungs and is where gas exchange between air and blood takes place. The respiratory zone includes the bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveoli.
Circulation or blood supply. The circulatory system and the respiratory system works together hand in hand. The respiratory system breathes in air, whereas the circulatory system pumps blood throughout the body. Number 1. Low pressure, high flow circulation, or the pulmonary circulation comprising of pulmonary arteries and the veins. The lungs are supplied with deoxygenated blood by the paired pulmonary arteries. Once the blood has received oxygenation, it leaves the lungs via 4 pulmonary veins, 2 for each lung. Pulmonary circulation has many secondary functions that facilitate gas exchange. The primary function of the pulmonary circulation is to bring venous blood from the superior and the inferior vena cavae into contact with the alveoli for gas exchange. In addition to gas exchange, the pulmonary circulation has 3 secondary functions. It serves as a filter, a metabolic organ, and a blood reservoir. The pulmonary circulation is innervated by sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerves. But unlike the situation in the airways, the sympathetic supply is of greater functional importance than that of parasympathetic. And even then, it only appears to exert a significant effect under conditions requiring fight or flight. Number 2. High pressure, high flow circulation, or the bronchial circulation, comprising of bronchial arteries and the veins. The airways and the pulmonary blood vessels, down as far as the terminal bronchioles, receive their nutrition from the bronchial circulation, which is part of the systemic circulation.
The respiratory muscles. The muscles of respiration are also called the breathing pump muscles. They form a complex arrangement in the form of semi-rigid bellows around the lungs. There are two types of respiratory muscles. One is the inspiratory muscles, where muscles that expand the thoracic cavity and induce inhalation. These are the diaphragm and external intercostals, which is most important, and the main inspiratory muscles is the diaphragm, or the dome shape when relaxed, and then flat shape when contract. Second is the expiratory muscles, which are the muscles that compress the thoracic cavity and induce exhalation. These are the internal intercostals and abdominal muscles. The abdominal muscles are the most important muscles of expiration. The abdominal muscle is the rectus abdominis, famously known as the six packs. The specialty of these muscles is that they are composed of fatigue-resistant muscle fibers. They are controlled by involuntary and voluntary mechanisms. If we want to take a breath, we can, even if we do not think about breathing. The body automatically does it.
Innervation. Innervation is known as the nerve supply, usually to a specific part of the body. So what innervates our lungs? Here we have autonomic and somatic. Autonomic controls involuntary movements, while somatic controls voluntary movements. The lungs are innervated by the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, which are under the autonomic, while the diaphragm is innervated by the somatic nervous system. At the root of each lung is a pulmonary plexus composed of efferent and afferent autonomic nerve fibers. The plexus is formed from branches of the sympathetic trunk and receives parasympathetic fibers from the vagus nerve. The parasympathetic system causes bronchoconstriction, whereas the sympathetic nervous system stimulates bronchodilation. Reflexes such as coughing and the ability of the lungs to regulate oxygen and carbon dioxide levels also result from the autonomic nervous system control.
The sympathetic nervous system innervates the blood vessels in the airways and lungs, while the parasympathetic nervous system decreases respiration and the heart rate and increases digestion. Number 2. Somatic. Controls voluntary movements. Diaphragm are innervated by somatic nervous system, whereas involuntary smooth airway muscle of the lungs is innervated entirely by the autonomic nervous system. The diaphragm is regulated by both the somatic and the autonomic nervous system.